I want you to think the last two countries America invaded. Iraq, population 25 million in 2003, flat desert plains, a conventional military that hadn't modernized since the 1980s. The US invaded with 150,000 troops. Baghdad fell in 21 days. Then it spent the next 8 years fighting an insurgency it couldn't win. It spent $2 trillion and left without achieving its core objectives.
Ending nearly 9 years of American military presence in Iraq.
Afghanistan. Population 27 million, mountainous, tribal, no real central government. America invaded in 2001. Instead, 20 years left with Taliban back in power. The same Taliban it went in to remove. Now I want you to look at Iran. Population 90 million, area 1.65 million square kilometers, 4 times the size of Iraq. Two of the most formidable mountain ranges in the Middle East, two of the largest deserts on Earth, a military ranked 16th globally with dispersed underground facilities that have been hardened for decades specifically against an American attack, and 90 million people with a 3,000-year-old national identity who have resisted foreign occupiers since before the Roman Empire existed. Rand Corporation, one of US military's own think tanks, estimated that a ground invasion in Iran would require about 500,000 to 1 million troops. The US currently has 1.3 million active duty military personnel total. Right now, the US has about 45 to 50,000 troops in the region, configured for air and naval operations. There are no armored divisions, no infantry brigades staged for a ground campaign. Because a ground campaign against Iran is not a military option. It is a mathematical impossibility. So the question isn't if the US can bomb Iran. It clearly can. It's been doing for months. The question is, what happens after the bombs stop? Who controls the country? Who enforces any deal? And who fills the power vacuum? Today, we're going one layer below the war itself to understand the geography that has protected Iran from conquerors for 3,000 years, and why the geography makes the current situation far more complicated than anyone in Washington wants to admit. Let's start with what makes Iran physically different from every other country America has fought in the modern era. Iran covers roughly 1.6 million square kilometers, but it's not flat space, it's vertical space. The country is essentially a high-altitude plateau, averaging 900 meters above sea level, surrounded on its western and northern edges by two enormous mountain systems. On the west, the Zagros Mountains, a 1,600-kilometer wall running from the Turkish border all the way down to the Persian Gulf, peaks exceeding 4,000 meters. This is the natural barrier between Iran and Iraq, the same barrier that stopped Saddam Hussein's armored divisions cold in 1980, when Iraq invaded Iran and expected a quick victory. Iraqi forces advanced about 80 kilometers into Iranian territory. Then the Zagros stopped them. The war lasted 8 years. On the north, you have these Alborz Mountains, protecting Tehran from the Caspian coast, steep, compact, and deeply folded terrain that makes any northern ground assault from Russia's historical direction essentially suicidal for an attacker. And between these two ranges, Tehran, a city of 15 million people the size of New York, sitting in a mountain basin ringed by peaks, accessible from the west only through predictable mountain passes that any competent defender can funnel, ambush, and hold indefinitely. Foreign policy put it directly when the current war started. These mountain chains have served as strategic shields against invaders for centuries, from Mark Antony's Roman armies in 36 BC to the Mongol invasions of the 13th century to Saddam's tanks in 1980. Every empire that has tried to penetrate the Iranian plateau through conventional ground assault have been slowed, exhausted, and ultimately defeated by the terrain. Now compare this to Afghanistan, a country usually called the graveyard of empires. Afghanistan's Hindu Kush mountains are formidable, but they create valleys and corridors that armies have always been able to navigate. Iran's Zagros and Alborz are different in scale and structure, broader, more continuous, and more deeply embedded into the population centers themselves. Iran's people don't live separate from their mountains, they live inside them. But mountains are just the first layer of Iran's geographic defense, because inside those mountains, in the center of the plateau, is something even more inhospitable, and it's something that most people who talk about invading Iran have clearly never looked at on a map. Once you get past of these mountains, you don't reach fertile plains. You reach two of the most hostile environment on earth. The Dasht-e, Iran's largest desert, a vast salt flat in the north-central part of the country. The surface looks solid. It isn't. Beneath, it lies wet, unstable clay. Military strategists describe it as similar to quicksand. Vehicles break through. People sink. It is almost entirely uninhabited, only partly explored, and virtually impassable for any mechanized military force. The Dasht-e in the southeast, quite possibly the hottest place on earth. Surface temperatures have been recorded above 70 degrees Celsius. Almost nothing lives there. It is one of the most extreme environments on the planet. Together, they cover roughly 1/3 of Iran's total land area. They function as a second defensive ring, an empty interior that any invading force would have to somehow supply across, maintain forces in, and project power through. In the age of motorized warfare, deserts have sometimes been navigable. But Iran's deserts are different. They're not sandy dunes like the Sahara. They are salt flats that look solid and aren't, and heat extremes that destroy vehicles and kill soldiers. In 1980, Operation Eagle Claw, the US attempted to rescue American hostages in Tehran. The operation is staged from a desert landing site called Desert 1 in eastern Iran. Military planners had surveyed it as firm, hard-packed ground. 3 weeks after the survey, it had turned to ankle-deep powder. 3 helicopters failed. The operation collapsed. 8 American servicemen died. The mission never reached Tehran. Iran's terrain doesn't just stop invading armies. It breaks their equipment, it collapses their logistics, and it kills their soldiers. It kills their planning assumption. And this is before we even get to the human geography. Because Iran isn't just physically formidable, it's ethnically, demographically, and historically formidable in ways that make occupation even more of an impossible proposition. 90 million people, a population that is majority Shia Muslim, with a national identity of 3,000 years old, and a history of fighting every major empire that ever tried to control them. What does that actually mean for everyone who tries to hold this country? Here is a number most people don't know. Iran has a population of roughly 90 million people. Iraq had 25 million in 2003. America struggled to occupy it for 8 years. Afghanistan had 27 million. America tried for 20 years, left with nothing changed. Iran has 90 million, 3.5 times Iraq, with a far more developed national consciousness and a far more capable military. And here is the thing about those 90 million population. About 90% of them are Shia Muslim. The Islamic Republic, whatever its failures domestically, has spent the last 47 years embedding itself into the religious and cultural identity of its Shia majority. Even Iranians who despise the government, and many do, tend to be deeply nationalistic when it comes to foreign invaders. That's not a recent phenomenon, it's ancient. Iran has been invaded by Arabs, Mongols, Ottomans, Russians, and even British, and every single time the Persian identity survived and reasserted itself into something better. Now, some analysts point to Iran's ethnic minorities as a potential wedge. Iran is not a monoethnic country. Persians are about 61% of the population. Azeris make up 16 to 20%. Kurds about 10%. There are Arabs, Baloch, Lars, Turkmen, a genuine mosaic of identities, many of whom have real grievance against Tehran. The US is reportedly exploring this angle, working with Kurdish opposition groups near the Iraqi border as a potential destabilizing ground element. Reports suggest the CIA is coordinating with the Iranian Kurdish opposition forces with Peshmerga on standby on the near border. But the Kurds became smarter. The Kurds didn't want to fight eventually because it's not their war. The Iranian ethnic minorities, despite their grievance, have historically not broken with the Iranian state when it's about the foreign invasion. During the Iran-Iraq war, Iraqi planners expected the Arab population of Khuzestan, Iran's oil-rich southeast, to rise up and welcome Iraqi forces. They didn't. Most remained loyal to Iran. The uprising never happened. There is a difference between resenting your own government and welcoming foreign armies. That distinction, that difference, has broken countless occupation strategies throughout the history. It broke the British in Afghanistan, it broke the Soviets in Afghanistan, and it may have broken America in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And any strategy built on counting on Iranian minorities to invite and sustain a foreign invasion is built on extremely fragile assumptions. And the population isn't just numerous, it's urban, educated, about 90% literacy. That's more than the US. Major cities the size of American metros. Tehran is comparable to New York. Mashhad is comparable to Los Angeles. Isfahan is comparable to Houston. These are not tribal villages. These are modern cities with millions of peoples who know exactly what occupation looks like and have a 3,000-year-old memory of what it feels like. So we have mountains that break supply lines, deserts that swallow armies, and 90 million people with an ancient national identity. But we haven't even talked about what Iran has been building, specifically deliberately, under those mountains for decades. Here is something that the most news coverage of the Iran war has completely missed. Iran has spent the last 40 years not just relying on its natural geography. It has been deliberately engineering its military infrastructure into that geography. Iran has one of the most extensive tunnel and underground bunker networks of any military in the world. Its nuclear facilities were not built in open fields. Fordo, one of its key uranium enrichment sites, is buried under 80 meters of rock inside a mountain near Qom. Natanz is underground. Dozens of ballistic missile production sites, command and control centers, and weapons storage facilities have been dispersed across Iran's mountainous interior, built deep into the rock, specifically engineered to survive airstrikes. Iran calls this doctrine anti-access or area denial, the same strategic architecture China uses in the South China Sea. The idea is not to match the American military head-on. It's to make the cost of projecting power so high and results so uncertain that attacking become strategically counterproductive. And even the most advanced American weapons are running into the limits of this strategy. The US used B-2 stealth bombers, the most capable penetrating strike aircraft in existence, and Israel deployed its new Black Sparrow air-launched ballistic missile against hardened Iranian facilities. But Iranian officials claimed their nuclear and missiles program were not comprehensively destroyed. They have been dispersed, moved deeper, hidden in locations that haven't been found yet, a target that you can't find, a target that you can't bomb. This is the deeper strategic reality that foreign policy captured precisely. Geography doesn't just make invasion difficult, it makes the war aim of permanently eliminating Iran's military capacity fundamentally uncertain. You can bomb what you find, but you cannot bomb what's been dispersed into 1.65 million square kilometers of mountains and desert. General John W. Vesey Jr. once said, "History is replete with enormous penalties incurred by those who paid too little attention to geography factors." Iran's military planners have paid very close attention. They have spent 4 decades turning their geography from a passive defense into an active one. So what does all of this actually mean for how this war ends? Because an air campaign can degrade, but geography means Iran cannot be decisively occupied from the air campaign, and a ground invasion does not exist. So what's the endgame here? Here is what I want you to take away from all of this. The war on Iran is not at its core a war of technology. Both sides know this. The US and Israel have overwhelming technological superiority, the most advanced stealth aircraft, the most precise munitions, satellite surveillance covering every centimeter of Iranian territory, and they are using all of it. But the endgame of this conflict is not determined by who has better bombs. It's determined by geography. Iran cannot be occupied. A RAND study says you would need 500,000 to 1 million troops for the attempt, forces that don't exist. The terrain would shred supply lines. The population, 90 million people with a 3,000-year identity, would resist indefinitely. The underground infrastructure is dispersed across mountains that cannot be comprehensively bombed. Napoleon went into Russia thinking he could win with superior tactics. He was defeated by General Winter and General Space. The Russians didn't need to outfit Napoleon, they needed to outlast him. The geography did the rest. Foreign policy called Iran's 2 hidden generals, general geography, its mountains and maritime choke points, and general endurance, its ability to absorb shocks and fight a long war. Both of those generals don't need orders, they don't need funding, they don't need to negotiate a ceasefire, they just need time. This is not a defense of the Iranian government. It's not a political statement, it's a geographic one. And geography, as we have seen throughout this story, doesn't care about politics. It doesn't care about the UN resolutions. It doesn't care about 200 billion military budgets or even $1.7 trillion military budgets. It just sits there, waiting. 3,000 years of empires have tried to break Iran. The mountains are still there.